The house smelled like fresh paint and possibility. I remember standing in the hallway on the first morning, barefoot, coffee in hand, sunlight cutting through the blinds I had chosen myself, and feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. My name is Brooke. And 18 months before that morning, I had signed divorce papers across a mahogany table from a man I had given 9 years of my life to. A man named Bradley. A man who, as it turned out, had been giving pieces of himself to someone else for at least 3 of those 9 years. I didn't fall apart when I found out. I want to be clear about that. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I sat very still at our kitchen table, looked at him, and said 4 words. Get a good lawyer. Because I already had mine. The divorce was not easy. Bradley had a way of making everything about his suffering, his confusion, his needs, his timeline. And behind him always, like shadow with opinions, was his mother, Eleanor, a woman who had spent the better part of a decade treating me like a guest in my own marriage. Politely tolerant on good days, subtly corrosive on every other day, Eleanor had never liked me. I was too independent for her taste, too unbothered. She had wanted a daughter-in-law she could shape. What she got was me. The settlement was fair. Painfully, legally, documented fair. Bradley kept the joint assets we'd agreed on. I walked away with my savings, my career, and my dignity, which frankly was the most valuable thing in that marriage by the end. I spent 8 months renting a quiet apartment, rebuilding, breathing. And then I did what I had always dreamed of doing entirely on my own terms. I bought a house. 4 bedrooms, a real kitchen. A backyard with an old oak tree that looked like it had been waiting for someone who would actually appreciate it. I paid the down payment with money I had earned, saved, and protected. My name, my credit, my deed. Nobody gave it to me. Nobody co-signed. Nobody helped. It was mine in every single sense of the word. I moved in on a Saturday. My sister helped me carry boxes. We ordered Thai food and sat on the floor because the furniture hadn't arrived yet. And we laughed until we cried about absolutely nothing. It was the happiest I had been in years. That was September. By October, they found out. I don't know who told Bradley about the house. We had no children together, no shared social circles I hadn't already quietly stepped back from. But word travels. It always does. And Bradley had a habit of keeping tabs on things he no longer had any right to. The first contact was a text. Casual. Almost friendly, which should have been my first warning. Hey, heard you bought a place. Can we talk? Mom wants to catch up. I stared at that message for a long time. Eleanor wanted to catch up. Eleanor, who had spent 9 years making it quietly, consistently clear that I was never quite enough. Eleanor wanted to catch up. I didn't respond. 3 days later, they showed up at my door. I want you to understand the specific audacity of that. They had my address. I still don't know how. And they drove 40 minutes across town. And they knocked on the door of a house that had absolutely nothing to do with either of them. I saw them through the glass panel beside the door. Bradley in his weekend jacket, hands in his pockets, looking like he was doing me a favor by existing. Eleanor beside him, posture perfect, expression arranged into something that was almost warmth. I opened the door. Brooke. Bradley smiled, that practice smile. Nice place. What do you want, Bradley? Eleanor stepped forward slightly. Just slightly. That was her move. The gentle advance, the soft takeover. We just thought it was time to have a real conversation, maturely. Like adults. I waited. She looked past me into the hallway, scanning the space with eyes that were already measuring it, calculating it. And then she actually said, "This is a lot of house for one person." And there it was, the opening move. I crossed my arms. Is there something specific you came to say? Bradley cleared his throat. Look, here's the thing, Brooke. I'm in a bit of a situation right now. The apartment I was renting, it fell through. And Mom's lease is up at the end of the month. And she doesn't want to renew somewhere new at her age. And Bradley. And the point is, you have 4 bedrooms, and we thought, Bradley. He stopped. Are you standing at my door? I said, very slowly, Asking me to give your mother a room in my house? Eleanor's expression shifted. Just slightly. The warmth dropped 1 degree. We're not asking for a room, Brooke. We're asking you to consider a more permanent arrangement. A family arrangement. I actually laughed. It came out before I could stop it. I'm not your family, Eleanor. Her chin lifted. You were. For 9 years you were. And family takes care of family. Bradley jumped in, then, his voice dropping lower, taking on that tone. The one he used when he wanted to sound reasonable, while saying something completely unreasonable. Listen, I know things ended badly between us, but Mom needs stability. You have space. And honestly, this house, the timing of you buying it, it affected the financial picture that Stop. I had certain expectations coming out of the settlement that weren't. Bradley, stop talking. He stopped. I looked at both of them, really looked. At the absolute confidence on Eleanor's face. At the practiced victimhood, already assembling itself in Bradley's eyes. At the sheer, staggering entitlement of 2 people standing on my porch on a Sunday afternoon, suggesting that my home, the thing I had built alone from the rubble of what their family had done to me, somehow belonged in their orbit. You need to leave, I said. Eleanor's voice went cold. Not dramatically cold, quietly cold, which was always so much worse. Brooke, I would think very carefully before you close this door. Bradley has legal options. If it comes out that certain assets were moved or structured in particular ways during your settlement. Are you threatening me? She smiled. I'm advising you the way family does. Bradley said nothing. He just looked at me with those eyes that used to make me doubt myself. And I realized, standing in the doorway of my own house, that they made me feel absolutely nothing now. Leave, both of you now. I closed the door. And then I stood in my hallway, in my house, and I took 3 slow breaths. And then I called my attorney. Her name was Patricia. Patricia had handled my divorce with the kind of precise, unhurried competence that made opposing counsel visibly nervous. She was the kind of lawyer who didn't raise her voice because she never needed to. The law, applied correctly, is already loud enough. I told her everything. The visit. The comments about the settlement. Eleanor's carefully worded threat about legal options. Bradley's implication that the timing of my home purchase had somehow impacted a financial picture he felt entitled to. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Brooke, don't block their number. I paused. What? Don't block them. Don't restrict them. Let them keep talking. She paused. And the next time they want a meeting, give them one. I understood immediately. I spent 4 days preparing. Patricia walked me through every detail. She would arrive before them and position herself in the 2nd bedroom off the hallway, which was unfurnished, which was perfect. She had a small, high-quality digital recording setup, audio and video, legally permissible under recording consent laws in our state, which operates under single-party consent. I was party to the conversation. That was all we needed. My job was simple. I was to be calm, receptive even. I was to ask open-ended questions. I was to let them talk. Whatever they said, I was to let them finish. The hardest part of a trap is not building it. The hardest part is being patient enough to let the other person walk into it themselves. I texted Bradley 3 days after the porch confrontation. Casual. Almost friendly. I've been thinking. Maybe we should sit down and talk properly. Come by Thursday at 6. We can discuss things like adults. He responded in under 4 minutes. Really appreciate that, Brooke. Mom will be glad. See you then. Of course she would be coming. Of course. Thursday arrived. Patricia was in position by 5:30. She had brought a legal notepad, 2 pens, and the kind of focused quiet that made the whole house feel organized. Before she settled into the back room, she looked at me and said simply, You don't have to perform anything. Just be yourself. Ask questions. They'll do the rest. I brewed coffee, set out cups, made the room look like a conversation. The doorbell rang at 6:02. Bradley walked in like he'd been here before. He hadn't. Eleanor moved through my front hallway with eyes that did that scanning thing again. Appraising, cataloging, Imagining. She made a small sound, not quite a compliment, not quite anything. The sound of a woman deciding what she would change. We sat in the living room. I poured coffee. I kept my expression open and attentive. "I'm glad you reached out," Bradley started. "I didn't want things to get complicated." "I don't want that either," I said. "So help me understand, what exactly are you proposing?" Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. "What we're proposing, Brooke, is simple. You have a home you don't fully need. Bradley is struggling. I have nowhere permanent to go. And this house, 4 bedrooms, bought just as the divorce was finalized, raises questions about whether all marital assets were properly disclosed." There it was, clean and direct, on tape. "What kind of questions?" I asked, gently, curiously. Bradley leaned forward. "The timing of the purchase is suspicious. You closed on this property 6 weeks after we signed the settlement, which means you had capital available that you may not have fully disclosed during proceedings, which could constitute—" He stopped himself, but not quickly enough. "It could constitute grounds to revisit the settlement." "Could it?" I said. "Tell me more about what you think that would look like." He told me. He talked for 11 minutes. About financial concealment, about what he believed he was owed, about how his situation had deteriorated since the divorce in ways that he felt were my fault. He used the phrase moral obligation 4 times. He used the phrase what's fair 7 times. He never once mentioned a single legal precedent, a single document, a single piece of actual evidence, because there wasn't any. What he had was entitlement, dressed up in legal-sounding language, being broadcast clearly into a recording device in the next room. And then Eleanor spoke. If Bradley was thunder, Eleanor was the cold front that made it dangerous. She spoke softly. She spoke with the measured patience of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of making an ultimatum sound like a favor. "Brooke, I want to be very clear with you. If you choose not to cooperate with us, not to find an arrangement that works for this family, Bradley will file a formal motion to reopen discovery on the divorce settlement. That process will be public. It will be documented. And even if nothing comes of it legally, it will be disruptive and expensive for you. So the question you need to ask yourself is whether you want to spend the next 2 years fighting us in court." She smiled. "Or simply come to an understanding now." I looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "And what would that understanding look like, Eleanor?" She didn't hesitate. "Bradley's name on the deed as co-owner, or a signed agreement allowing me primary residency of the property for a minimum of 5 years at no cost. One or the other." Bradley nodded. Like this was reasonable. Like this was a Tuesday. I took a long sip of my coffee. "Let me get someone who can speak to the legal side of this," I said. "She's been helping me understand my options." Bradley frowned. "Who?" I stood up and walked to the hallway. I didn't rush. I knocked twice on the 2nd bedroom door, and Patricia opened it. Patricia stepped into the living room with a leather portfolio under one arm and the expression of someone who had heard every word and found most of them professionally fascinating. Bradley stood up, a reflex, the instinct of a man who had just realized the room had changed. Eleanor didn't move, but something in her eyes shifted, rapidly recalculating. "Good evening," Patricia said. Her voice was level, unhurried. "My name is Patricia Harmon. I'm Miss
Brooks Legal Counsel.
I specialize in real estate and civil litigation. I've been in the adjacent room for the last 40 minutes. She paused. "I've been listening." Bradley's mouth opened, closed. "In addition," Patricia continued, setting her portfolio on the coffee table and opening it with the kind of deliberate calm that fills a room, "I should advise you that this conversation has been recorded in its entirety, audio and video, in compliance with the single-party consent statutes of this state, of which my client is the consenting party." She looked at Bradley directly. "That's not a threat. That's a disclosure. You're entitled to know." Eleanor spoke first. You can't just." "I absolutely can," Patricia said. And I did. She removed a set of documents from the portfolio and placed them on the table. Not handed them, placed them, like exhibits. What you're looking at is a formal cease and desist letter, effective immediately, prohibiting either of you from contacting my client, appearing at her property, or communicating with her in any form, directly or through a third party, regarding any claim, real or implied, to this home. Patricia's finger moved across the page. Additionally, based on the statements made this evening, specifically the suggestion that my client failed to disclose assets during settlement proceedings, and the conditional threat to initiate legal action unless property rights were transferred. I want to be precise with you about what you have done tonight. She looked at both of them. You have made an extortion-adjacent demand on tape. You threatened litigation, not to pursue a legitimate legal remedy, but as explicit leverage to compel the transfer of private property. That is not a gray area. That is a recording. And depending on how aggressively you choose to pursue this, it becomes the foundation of a complaint that will look significantly worse for the two of you than it will for my client. The room was silent. Bradley's face had gone through several colors and had settled on something pale and very still. Eleanor, to her credit, held her posture. But her hands, those carefully folded hands, had tightened. Patricia closed the portfolio. I would strongly encourage you to take those documents with you. Read them. Have your own counsel review them. And then make the decision that is in your best interest. She said it gently, professionally, like she was recommending a restaurant. Bradley looked at me. And for the first time in all the years I had known him, he looked genuinely uncertain. Like the floor had turned out to be different than he expected. Like the woman across from him was different than he expected. I held his gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at him, quietly and completely. The way you look at something you've fully processed. I think you should go, I said. He picked up the documents. Eleanor did not. Patricia noted that without expression. They walked to the front door. Bradley paused once, hand on the frame, like he was going to say something. Some final word. Some final recalibration of the narrative. He didn't. The door closed. And the house was quiet again. Patricia stayed for another hour. We reviewed the recording. We documented the visit with timestamp notes. We discussed the 0% likelihood that Bradley would pursue further legal action, given that any motion to revoke the settlement would now be met with a recording of him admitting he had no actual evidence of wrongdoing. Only assumptions and pressure tactics. Bradley never filed anything. Eleanor never called. Within 3 weeks, the cease and desist had been formally received and acknowledged by Bradley's attorney, who wrote a single, brief letter indicating his client would not be pursuing further contact. That letter is framed. I'm kidding, but I thought about it. Here is what I want to say to you, if you're still with me at the end of this. The people who want what you have built are counting on one thing. They are counting on you being too emotional, too conflict-averse, or too exhausted by their chaos to think clearly. They are counting on you reacting instead of responding. They are counting on you forgetting, even for a moment, who you are and what you are worth. I sat across from two people who had spent years trying to make me feel like a supporting character in a story that was actually entirely mine. They came to my house, and tried to use fear and implication and the performance of power to take something that I had built alone. What they didn't understand was that I had already done the hardest work. I had already survived them. I had already rebuilt. I already knew exactly who I was, on the other side of their worst behavior. And when you know that, when you are settled in that, no one can threaten you with a version of yourself you've already left behind. The house still smells like fresh paint sometimes. When the windows are closed and the morning is quiet, I catch it near the hallway. I still stand there barefoot, coffee in hand, still peaceful, still mine.